It was a quiet afternoon in Central Park, the kind of day where the sun casts a golden glow over everything. James Whittaker, a millionaire with a successful career, was taking his usual weekend walk with his daughter Emily. Since his wife Claire passed away from cancer, James had thrown himself into raising their little girl alone. Every weekend, their walks were his way of holding on to Claire, to the memory of their life together, and to Emily, the bright spark that remained. Emily, always the lively one, tugged at James's hand and pointed toward something across the park. "Daddy, that's my brother," she exclaimed. James stopped in his tracks, momentarily startled. "What did you just say?" he asked, narrowing his eyes as he looked at Emily. She spun around, her pink dress swishing as she did, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "That boy over there, sitting by the fountain, he's my brother." James squinted across the park, looking at a little boy no older than 5. He sat alone on the edge of the fountain, clutching a battered cardboard box to his chest. His clothes were torn and dirty, his shoes barely held together by worn-out laces. But it wasn't the boy's appearance that caught James off guard. It was his eyes. They were striking piercing blue, the exact same shade as Emily's. "Emily, don't say things like that," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't have a brother. You only have me." "No, Daddy, I know it," she insisted, her voice unwavering. "That's my brother. I feel it." James felt a chill run through him. This wasn't some childish fantasy. He couldn't ignore the resemblance, the shape of his nose, the curve of his cheek, the way his eyes seemed to look right through him. It was haunting. His heart began to pound. Could it be possible? With cautious steps, James approached the boy, still holding Emily's hand. He crouched down to the child's level, trying to keep his tone soft. "Hey there," he said gently. "What's your name?" The boy's grip on the cardboard box tightened, but he didn't respond. "I'm James," James continued. "This is my daughter Emily. We were just walking through the park." The boy glanced at Emily, then back at James. His voice was barely a whisper. "Noah." "Noah," James repeated. "That's a nice name." James took a deep breath and asked the next question. "Where's your mom, Noah?" The boy hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously to the ground. "At home," he muttered. "She's sick." James's chest tightened. "Do you live far from here?" he asked, trying to remain calm. Noah looked down at his worn-out shoes, his voice barely audible. "We live in a basement apartment on 43rd Street. Mama doesn't let me go far, but today she was sleeping too long and there wasn't any food, so I came out." James tried to hold back the rising wave of concern. "Do you have a dad?" he asked softly. Noah shook his head. "Mama said he left before I was born." James felt dizzy. It was all too familiar. His mind flashed back to 6 years ago, to a woman who had worked for him, Mary Carter. She had been a shy, kind receptionist, blonde hair, blue eyes, just like Noah. But her time at the company had ended abruptly after a mix-up in accounting files. She had never fought for her job, she just disappeared. Could this little boy be the product of that time? Was this his child? James reached into the small backpack he had slung over one shoulder. Emily had insisted on bringing snacks, and he pulled out a wrapped sandwich, holding it out to Noah. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice gentle. Noah hesitated, but took the sandwich, his small fingers trembling as he clutched it close. "Thank you," he mumbled. James watched Noah eat slowly, almost wearily, like he expected someone to take it away at any moment. There was something heartbreakingly graceful about the way he sat, making himself as small and invisible as possible. Emily, however, seemed completely at ease. She sat beside him on the grass and smiled brightly. "Hi, Noah," she said cheerfully. "I like your eyes. They're just like mine." Noah blinked and a faint smile curled at the corners of his lips. James's heart ached as he watched the scene unfold. The resemblance was undeniable, the same eyes, the same features. He reached for his phone and dialed his assistant. "Monica," James said, his voice tight. "I need you to find everything you can about a former employee, Mary Carter. She worked here about 6 years ago. Start with HR records, anything you can get your hands on." "Yes, Mr. Whittaker, I'm on it," Monica replied without hesitation. James hung up, his mind racing. He looked down at the 2 children. Emily was now showing Noah her stuffed bunny, chatting away like they had known each other forever. He knelt down again to Noah. "Noah," he said softly, "how would you feel about coming with us for a little while, just to have a good meal, make sure you're okay? Then I'll take you back to your mom." Noah stared at him for a long moment, clutching the sandwich and his box. Then finally he nodded. James helped Emily into his arms, his mind spinning. He didn't know what he was about to uncover, but something inside him told him that his life had just changed forever. All of it began with Emily's words, "Daddy, that's my brother." As James led Noah and Emily to the car, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on his chest. His thoughts were spinning out of control. Could Noah really be his son? Was it possible that a chance encounter in the park had set off a chain of events that would change his life forever? The car ride to his penthouse was quiet, with Noah sitting next to Emily, clutching his cardboard box like it was his lifeline. Emily, ever the talkative one, chatted away, showing Noah her latest drawings, explaining how much she loved her new toy bunny, and describing the house she lived in. Noah, however, didn't say much. He seemed cautious, like he was waiting for something bad to happen, like he wasn't sure where he belonged. When they arrived at the penthouse, Noah hesitated at the threshold, his small frame frozen in place. The grandeur of the place seemed overwhelming to him, a stark contrast to the life he was used to. The polished floors, the towering windows overlooking Central Park, the glittering chandelier, all of it felt like a different world to Noah. "Come in, buddy," James said gently, trying to ease his anxiety. "You're safe here." Emily darted ahead, her curls bouncing as she ran down the hallway. "Come on, Noah," she called. "You have to see my room. It's pink and has stars on the ceiling." Noah stepped inside slowly, his wide eyes scanning the space. His grip on his cardboard box remained tight, but he followed Emily down the hallway, drawn by her enthusiasm. James watched them disappear into Emily's room, a quiet ache settling in his chest. Turning, he walked to his home office and sat down at his desk. His mind was racing, and he knew he had to get to the bottom of this. He opened a locked cabinet, pulling out old company records files he hadn't touched in years. As he flipped through the pages, he found the name he was looking for, Mary Carter. There was a photo of her, stapled to the corner of the file, a young woman with golden hair and a warm smile. She had been a receptionist at his company for less than a year, before everything had gone wrong. A mix-up with a client report had spiraled into a full-blown issue, and James had been too tired, too overwhelmed to do anything other than sign the termination papers. She never fought it, she simply vanished. James's heart sank as he scanned the file, the memories flooding back. Mary had been pregnant when she left. He remembered now. The thought gnawed at him, but he couldn't shake it. Could this child Noah really be his son? He found an old address linked to her name in the company's emergency contact records. It was a rundown apartment in Brooklyn, one of those cheap, poorly maintained buildings where people struggle to make ends meet. James pulled up the address online and found pictures of cracked walls and graffiti-covered doors. A pit grew in his stomach. No, this couldn't be happening. Noah had been telling the truth. His mother was sick, and they had been living in poverty while James had been building skyscrapers and attending galas. The guilt was suffocating. He had dismissed Mary when she needed him most. He had failed her, and now there was a child, his child that he had never even known about. His mind raced as he thought about what he had to do. Later that evening, while Emily and Noah played with building blocks on the living room carpet, James made a phone call to a discreet charity organization that delivered aid to struggling families. "I want a full grocery order sent to this address," he said, his voice steady. "Include fruits, vegetables, meat medicine, vitamins, cleaning supplies, no branding, no notes, just deliver it quietly." "Understood," the representative replied. James ended the call and walked back to the living room. Emily and Noah were giggling, building a fort with blankets. It felt almost surreal, like some strange, beautiful dream. James knelt beside them, watching his daughter and this boy who seemed to belong to her, even though he had just met him. "Noah," he said softly, "how about we make pizza tonight, just as me, you, and Emily?" Noah blinked, his eyes flicking to James. "Make it?" he asked, the hint of surprise in his voice. "From scratch," James replied with a smile. Emily clapped her hands excitedly. "I want pepperoni flowers," she said. The rest of the evening unfolded in a whirlwind of laughter and joy. They made a mess with flower-decorated pizzas with olive slices, and for the first time in what felt like forever, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. There was something about the way Noah was so cautiously receptive to their kindness, like he was finally starting to believe that things could be different. Later that night, After dinner, James took out a small red bicycle from the storage closet. He had bought one identical to the one Emily had for Noah. He handed it to him, his voice soft. "This is for you." Noah stared at it, and for a moment, James wondered if the boy would even know how to react. Then, to his surprise, Noah's lips curled into the smallest, most genuine smile James had seen from him. For the first time, it felt like Noah was truly home. The next morning, James woke early, his mind still racing with questions. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, that the life he had built so carefully was being turned upside down. But he also knew that there was no turning back. The truth had already started to unfold, and now it was time to face it, to confront the past, and figure out what the future held for him, for Emily, and for Noah. As he got dressed, he noticed Emily and Noah still asleep on the living room carpet, the blanket they had used for their fort now tangled around their small bodies. The peacefulness of the scene made his heart ache, knowing the boy before him had endured so much before this moment, and he was now trying to adjust to a world that was vastly different from the one he had known. James gave them a moment before gently waking them, his voice soft. "Hey kids, it's time for breakfast." Emily immediately perked up her curls, bouncing as she ran to the kitchen. Noah, on the other hand, took his time. He seemed hesitant, unsure of his place in this strange new world. "Are you okay, Noah?" James asked quietly, noticing his hesitation. Noah looked up at him with big, uncertain eyes. "I don't know. It's just so different." James crouched down to his level, his expression gentle. "I know it's a lot, but you're safe here, and we're going to make sure you're okay. You're not alone." Noah didn't say anything, but the smallest flicker of reassurance seemed to pass through his eyes. Breakfast was quiet, but Emily's endless chatter filled the silence. She talked about everything: the park, the new toy she had gotten, her plans for the next day's adventure. Noah mostly listened, occasionally offering a shy smile or a quiet "yeah" in response. James watched them closely, noticing the way they interacted, the way Emily's openness began to chip away at Noah's defenses. He didn't know how much time it would take, but he could see the walls slowly starting to come down. After breakfast, James told them they were going on a little adventure. Emily's face lit up with excitement, but Noah's expression remained cautious. "Are we going far?" he asked, his voice small. "Not too far," James reassured him. "Just somewhere important." James packed a small bag for Noah, including clean clothes and a new toy that Emily had insisted on giving him. He wasn't sure what to expect when they reached their destination, but he knew it was time to face the truth. He couldn't wait any longer. As they climbed into the car, James's driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, sensing the tension in the air. "Where to, Mr. Whittaker?" he asked. James hesitated for a brief moment, then responded, "I'll give you the address on the way." The drive was long, the city skyline gradually shifting from sleek glass towers to worn-out brick buildings and rusted fences. The contrast was stark, and with each mile James's heart pounded harder. He was getting closer to the past, closer to the truth, but there was no way to know what he would find. When they finally arrived, James stepped out of the car with Noah by his side. The boy was clutching his small bag, his wide eyes scanning the worn-out apartment complex in front of him. It was a far cry from the penthouse they had just left. James took a deep breath and knocked on the faded green door of apartment 4B. The door creaked open, and James was met with the tired face of Mary Carter. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she recognized him, her hand instinctively reaching to pull Noah closer to her side. "Noah," she gasped, her voice trembling as the boy rushed into her arms. James felt his chest tighten. The last time he had seen Mary, she was pregnant, her future uncertain. Now the woman standing before him was a shell of the person he remembered, thin, weary, but still graceful in her own way. "James," Mary said, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," James replied softly. "Emily, my daughter, saw Noah. She said he's her brother. I didn't believe it, but now I need to know the truth." Mary's jaw tightened, and for a moment, James saw the anger flash in her eyes. "You don't get to ask questions. Not after what you did." James swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "Please just give me a few minutes." Mary hesitated, but then nodded reluctantly. She stepped aside, and James entered the apartment, his heart heavy. The small space was dark and cramped, a stark contrast to the open sunlit rooms of his penthouse. It was a home that had been built with love, but one that had also been made from struggle and sacrifice. Once inside, Mary clutched Noah tightly in her arms. Her voice trembled as she spoke, the words coming out in a rush. I was pregnant, James. I tried to tell you. I sent emails, called you, but no one let me through. Then I got fired. I had nothing. Her bitter laugh caught in her throat. You never saw any of that, did you? You were too busy being important. James felt a pang of guilt twist inside him. He hadn't known, not really. He hadn't bothered to ask the right questions or make sure she was okay. He had been too focused on his own success, and in doing so, he had abandoned her. I'm sorry, James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I should have asked, should have looked for you. Mary shook her head, her gaze hardening. You don't get to show up now and play savior. Noah has a life. It's not much, but it's ours. James took a step forward, his voice gentle but firm. I'm not here to take him away. I just want to help. Mary's eyes filled with doubt, and James understood. He wasn't asking for her forgiveness, not yet. But he had to try, if not for him, then for Noah. Is he my son? James asked, his heart in his throat. Mary hesitated, then nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, but I don't want your money. I just want to protect him. James knelt beside her, his heart aching. I'm not here to offer money. I just want to help. Please let me try. Mary's eyes softened, but only slightly. She picked up an envelope James had placed on the counter, her fingers trembling as she opened it. This isn't for forgiveness, James said softly. It's for Noah Wren medicine food. I'll come back tomorrow. Mary glanced down at the envelope, then back at James. Her gaze was wary, but there was a flicker of something else, something like hope. Will you let me take a DNA test? James asked quietly. Mary hesitated again, but then nodded. Fine, but no promises. James stood up, feeling the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between them. He looked at Noah, who was holding his mother's hand, still unsure, but quietly watching him with cautious curiosity. I'll see you soon, okay? James said softly. Noah nodded, then to James's surprise, stepped forward and hugged his leg. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something profound. James swallowed hard, trying to steady himself as he turned and walked down the hall. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would never let Noah go again. The next morning, James awoke with a quiet resolve. The events of the previous day had set his mind on a path he hadn't anticipated. He had taken the first step, he had confronted Mary, learned the truth, and faced the possibility that the boy he had met in Central Park might actually be his son. But now it was time to deal with the aftermath. The weight of responsibility felt heavy, but James was determined to do whatever it took to make things right. For Noah, for Mary, for their family. As he moved through his morning routine, his thoughts were fixed on one thing: making sure Noah felt like he truly belonged. He couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future. And in that future, Noah would be a part of it. James wasn't sure where the road would take them, but he knew he had to walk it step by step. After breakfast, James set out with Noah and Emily once more. They had a plan for the day: a visit to the doctor for Noah's health checkup, a new experience for him. It wasn't much, but it was important. Noah needed to know that people cared for him, that his well-being mattered. As they arrived at the medical center, Noah's eyes were wide with apprehension. He clutched his small bag tightly, as if afraid something would be taken from him. James crouched down to his level, offering a reassuring smile. It's going to be okay, buddy, James said, his voice soft. You're safe here. We're just going to make sure you're healthy and strong, that's all. Noah looked up at him, unsure, but nodded slightly. Emily, as always, was a little ball of energy. She grabbed his hand, her voice cheerful. Come on, Noah. It's gonna be fun. You get a sticker after. Noah's lips twitched into the tiniest of smiles as Emily led him into the waiting room. James followed them, his heart swelling with a mixture of emotion. Seeing Emily so enthusiastic, so excited for Noah to experience something as simple as a doctor's visit, reminded him just how much they had already become a family. Inside the clinic, the doctor was kind and patient, carefully explaining everything to Noah, speaking to him like he was the most important person in the room. Noah remained quiet, but seemed to relax in the doctor's presence. As the visit went on, James couldn't help but notice how Noah was starting to open up little by little. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Afterward, James took the kids out for lunch. As they sat at the small cafe, Emily chatted away, sharing everything on her mind, while Noah ate slowly, his eyes darting around the room. He was still adjusting, but James could see that the walls he had built up around himself were beginning to crack. That evening, when they returned to the penthouse, James found himself at a crossroads. The past few days had been a whirlwind, and he knew that the next step in this journey would be crucial. He needed to speak with Mary again. They had unfinished business, the truth needed to be laid bare, and whatever lay ahead, they had to face it together. Mary had agreed to the DNA test, but James knew that her trust wasn't easily earned. He wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive him or if she ever would, but he had to at least try. He owed it to her and to Noah. That night, while Emily and Noah played in the living room, James excused himself and stepped into his home office. He reached for his phone and dialed Monica's number. "Monica, I need you to pull the DNA test results as soon as possible," James said, his voice calm but urgent. "I need to know everything. I have to make sure this is right." Monica's voice was steady. "Understood, Mr. Whittaker. I'll have them ready for you." James hung up and sat in silence for a moment. His eyes drifted to the window where the lights of the city sparkled in the distance. It all seemed so far removed from the life he had left behind. But now, in the center of all the chaos, there was a new sense of purpose. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts as she appeared in the doorway, her face alight with excitement. "Daddy, can we play a game?" James smiled softly, wiping away the furrow from his brow. "Sure, sweetheart. What do you want to play?" "Hide and seek," she declared, and before he could respond, she was off already, racing down the hallway. James chuckled to himself, following her into the living room. He found Noah sitting on the couch watching them with a quiet intensity, as if unsure how to join in. James approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hey Noah," James said softly, sitting next to him, "you wanna play too?" Noah looked up at him, his eyes still cautious, but this time there was a flicker of curiosity. "How do you play?" "It's easy," James replied. "You close your eyes while someone hides and then you have to find them. Emily's already running off to hide, so it's your turn to look for her." Noah hesitated, but then he nodded. "Okay, I'll try." As the game unfolded, James could see that Noah was beginning to relax slowly but surely. The joy and laughter that filled the room brought a warmth to his heart. He wasn't sure how long it would take, but he knew one thing for certain: this was their family now. The night ended with the three of them sitting on the couch, laughing and sharing stories. For the first time in a long while, James felt at peace. Noah was still quiet, but he was there, participating, connecting slowly, finding his place in the world that James had built for him. Emily, of course, was her usual bright self, filled with energy and joy, and she seemed to understand in her own way that Noah was a part of their family just as much as she was. James leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to the two children as they giggled. He knew that things wouldn't be easy, that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. He had his family, his real family, and he was willing to fight for them no matter what it took. The truth was, James had already lost so much, but now he had something he'd never imagined he'd find again: hope. And with that hope, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed seemed to move in slow motion for James. He had always been a man who was used to making quick decisions, who had thrived on deadlines and boardroom negotiations. But now, as he watched Noah and Emily play together, something deep inside him shifted. He was no longer just making business deals, he was learning how to be a father. And it was the hardest, most rewarding thing he had ever done. But the uncertainty was still there. While Noah was starting to open up, starting to become part of their world, James knew that the real test was still ahead. The DNA test results would come in soon, and with them, a new reality. The weight of that truth hung over him every day. James found himself standing on the balcony one evening, the cool breeze brushing against his face. The city stretched out before him, but it no longer felt like home. His mind wandered back to the past, to the decisions he had made that had led him here. His eyes flickered to the glass doors behind him, where he could see Emily and Noah playing with their building blocks in the living room. It was then that he realized how much he had already changed. A man who had once been obsessed with success, with power, with everything he could build in the material world, was now standing on the edge of something much more important: a family. A family that wasn't bound by blood, but by something far stronger: by love. As he stood there, Lost in thought, the sound of footsteps behind him broke through his reverie. He turned to see Mary walking toward him, her face a mixture of apprehension and determination. "James," she said softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. "We need to talk." He nodded, his chest tightening. This was the moment he had been dreading and hoping for. He had done everything he could to make things right, but now the past was about to collide with the present in a way that would determine everything. Mary stepped closer, her gaze searching his face for any hint of hesitation. "I've been thinking about what you said, the help you offered, the grocery delivery, the medical assistance, the job offer. All of it. It's a lot. But what I don't understand is why. Why now?" James swallowed hard, taking a step toward her. "Because I failed you, Mary. I failed to be there when you needed me most. And now I have a chance to do better. For you, for Noah, for Emily." Mary shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something softer, something that James couldn't quite place. "You think you can fix it all? With money, with gestures. You've been living this life of luxury. James and I've been here struggling, raising Noah on my own. Do you have any idea what that's been like?" James felt the sting of her words, but he didn't flinch. He deserved it. "No, I don't, but I want to understand. I want to help you, Mary, in whatever way I can. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can do better." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Mary glanced down at her hands, her fingers curling into fists, before she released them with a sigh. "You don't get to just walk back into my life like nothing happened," she said, her voice softer now. "You can't erase the past, James. But I'm willing to try to see what happens from here." James's heart swelled with relief, but he knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something uncertain and fragile. But it was a beginning. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the screen as the message from Monica appeared. "The results are in. You need to see them." He didn't have to read it twice. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. James's pulse quickened as he looked up at Mary, who was already watching him, sensing the shift in his mood. "It's time," he said quietly. "The results. I need to go check them." Mary nodded. "I'll come with you." The drive to the office was silent. Neither of them spoke, both lost in their thoughts as the world outside the car passed by in a blur. James's mind raced 1,000 thoughts, spiraling through him. What would the test say? Was Noah truly his son? And if he was, what would that mean for all of them? Could he really be the father Noah needed, or would it all fall apart again? When they arrived at his office, James led Mary to the private conference room. Monica was already there, holding the sealed envelope. She handed it to James without a word, her eyes filled with sympathy. James sat down at the table, his hands trembling slightly as he tore open the envelope. He glanced at Mary, who had taken a seat beside him, her expression unreadable. He pulled the paper from the envelope and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the text, the words blurring together for a moment before they came into focus. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. It was true, Noah was his son. For a moment, the room was silent. James's heart beat in his chest, his mind spinning with the enormity of what he had just learned. He looked up at Mary, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. "It's true," James said, his voice barely a whisper. Mary's lips trembled, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something, but the words never came. Instead, she reached for Noah's picture on the desk, her fingers brushing over it gently. "We need to tell him," James said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "He needs to know." Mary nodded slowly, her expression softening. "He does." They sat in silence for a long moment, each of them processing the revelation in their own way. James felt a flood of emotions, relief, guilt, and a profound sense of responsibility. But most of all, he felt a deep, overwhelming love for this child who had been hidden from him for so long. After what felt like an eternity, Mary stood up, her eyes meeting James's with a quiet strength. "Let's go home. Together." James nodded, standing as well. They walked out of the conference room, together side by side, the weight of the past still hanging over them. But now, for the first time in years, there was a flicker of hope. As they made their way to the car, James glanced at Mary, then at the city around them. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: he wasn't walking it alone anymore. The days following the revelation of Noah's paternity were a whirlwind of emotions. There was so much to process, so many questions to answer, so many decisions to be made. But amid all the chaos, there was also a sense of clarity that James had never felt before. He had found something he didn't even know he was searching for his family. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, James believed that real love, the kind that held people together through everything, was worth fighting for. James had always been used to controlling everything in his life. His business, his success, even his relationships. Everything was carefully curated, built on a foundation of strategy and hard work. But this was different. Raising Noah, building a life with Mary and Emily, was not something he could plan. It was something that needed to grow naturally, like a plant taking root in rich soil. Noah was still adjusting to his new reality. The boy who had once been so withdrawn was beginning to show signs of the warmth that James had hoped for. There were still moments of silence, moments where Noah would retreat into himself, but there were also moments of connection. The way his face lit up when Emily would raise him to the door, the way he smiled when James asked him about his day. Those were the small victories that mattered most. But it wasn't just Noah who was learning to trust again. Mary and James were slowly rebuilding their relationship piece by piece. It wasn't going to happen overnight, and they both knew it, but there was progress. They had to learn how to communicate again, how to trust each other, how to face the past, without letting it dictate their future. One evening, after dinner, James found himself standing in the kitchen, washing the dishes. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table coloring in her new princess coloring book, and Noah was quietly eating the last of his dessert. It was a peaceful scene, and for a moment, James let himself enjoy it. He had come so far from the lonely, ambitious man he used to be. Now he had this family. Mary walked into the kitchen, her face thoughtful. She had been quieter than usual lately, and James noticed it. She had been grappling with her own emotions, unsure of how to move forward. But tonight, as she looked at him, there was something different in her eyes. Something softer, something more open. "James," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I've been thinking about something." He turned to face her, his hands still wet from the dishes. "What's on your mind?" Mary hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if weighing her words carefully. "I think it's time for us to really talk about us. Not just Noah or Emily, but us. I know we can't go back, but maybe we can build something new. Maybe we can try again, together." James felt his heart skip a beat. The words he had been hoping for, the ones he had been afraid to hear, were finally coming from her. His throat tightened as he set the dish in his hand down, stepping toward her. "I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully fix everything," he said, his voice soft, "but I'm willing to try. For you, for Noah, for Emily, whatever it takes. I'll be here." Mary smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing as she stepped into his arms. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't an easy fix, but it was a start, a real honest start. Later that evening, after the kids were tucked into bed, James and Mary sat together on the couch. The glow of the fireplace flickered in the background as they shared a quiet moment of peace. The world outside seemed far away in that moment, and for the first time in a long time, James allowed himself to believe that everything would be okay. "I've been thinking," James said, softly, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should move closer to the bakery. You and the kids. Start fresh in a way. We could find a place near there where we can all be together. What do you think?" Mary looked at him, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I've been thinking about that too. I like the idea of being closer to you, but I also want the kids to have some stability. And I think that's something we can offer them." James smiled, his heart swelling with the thought of a future where they could all be together. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers gently. "We'll take it one day at a time, together." Mary nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. They didn't have all the answers, and they never would, but as long as they had each other, they would figure it out. It wasn't about the past anymore, it was about what they could build together from this point forward. A few weeks later, James stood outside a small, cozy house not far from the bakery. It was nothing like the sleek, high-rise apartment he had once called home, but it felt right. It felt like a place where they could build a real life together. The garden out front was small, but full of potential, and as James looked at the house, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was the next chapter, the one they were writing together. As he turned to look at Mary, who was standing beside him with Emily and Noah, he felt the weight of everything they had been through. It hadn't been easy, and it never would be, but it was worth it. They were worth it. "Let's do this," James said, his voice steady with determination. "Let's make this home." Mary smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. Together. Inside the house, Emily and Noah were already running around, excited to explore their new space. James watched them for a moment, a sense of pride filling his chest. They were his family now, his whole family. And that night, as they all sat together at the dinner table, laughter echoing through the rooms, James realized that this was what it meant to be truly alive, to love, to forgive, to rebuild. He didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, surrounded by the people who meant the most to him, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led him here, to this moment, to his family, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would never let them go again.